All right, so there was an absolute bombshell that was dropped in the Washington Post. It's basically being called, I guess, the Afghanistan Papers now, because as you guys know, the Vietnam Papers that had been released by Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers. It was basically a drop of government files that basically revealed that, oh, look, the government throughout like four presidencies has been lying to the American public about the war in Vietnam and purposefully misleading them and lying to them. And so lying them into a war that's costing, tens of thousands of lives. I think like 58K died. Then who knows how many were wounded and, came back with insanely horrible conditions, right? But now we've got this dump. This was, I believe, compiled by a group named Lessons Learned or something, and it's internal government interviews with certain people. It was blocked from being released, but the Washington Post took the government to court, saying that we have we're able to do this through FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and so there's a lot of interesting information in here that's absolutely fascinating, which is basically that the American people have essentially been lied into, and really that this war really there's no organization, there's no real setup, and there's no real way to win. I mean, it's pretty much a Vietnam level quagmire at this point. Except it's not U.S. soldiers who are dying most. It's Afghan civilians and their soldiers. But so there are multiple things to look at here. So first of all, there is a piece in here where basically it explains that they didn't know who their enemies really were, okay? And that's pretty crazy. So it says, was Al-Qaeda the enemy or the Taliban? Was Pakistan a friend or an adversary? What about the Islamic State and the bewildering array of foreign jihadists, let alone the warlords on the CIA's payroll? According to the documents, the U.S. government never settled on an answer. As a result, in the field, U.S. troops often couldn't tell friend from foe. Quote, they thought I was going to come to them with a map to show them where the good guys and bad guys live, an unnamed former advisor to an Army Special Forces team told government interviews in 2017. It took several conversations for them to understand that I did not have that information in my hands. At first, they just kept asking, but who are the bad guys? Where are they? It says the view wasn't any clearer from the Pentagon. I have no visibility into who the bad guys are, Rumsfeld complained in a September 8th, 2003 snowflake. We are woefully deficient in human intelligence. So the biggest flaw already, they don't even have like a set enemy, and that's the problem. So it's like, okay, we need to take down Al-Qaeda and OBL. Okay, OBL ends up dying. Now you're still in the war. What's going on here? And then you've got Pakistan having a big role in funding the Taliban. So are you doing anything about that? I guess they don't really care about that, or they're not doing anything about that. But this is pretty bad, right? If you go into a war, you need to know who your enemy is. Otherwise, you're rolling people into a war that has no objective or person or group to even take down. This says our policy was to create a strong central government, which is idiotic because Afghanistan does not have a history of a strong central government. The time frame for creating a strong central government is 100 years, which we didn't have. That's a former unidentified former State Department official. So then another piece of this, basically goes on to describe that basically what was happening was the government just threw money at Afghanistan and thought that would fix everything. It says during the peak of the fighting from 2009-2012, U.S. lawmakers and military commanders believed the more they spent on schools, bridges, canals, and other civil works projects, the faster security would improve. Aid workers told government interviewers it was a colossal misjudgment, akin to pumping kerosene on a dying campfire just to keep the flame alive. So, I mean, at least they're, trying to build stuff, which is cool, humanitarian type of aid. But the way that they were doing it was really stupid, though. This is one unnamed executive with the U.S. Agency for International Development guessed that 90% of what they spent was overkill. Quote, we lost objectivity. We were given money, told to spend it, and we did without reason. Many aid workers blamed Congress for what they saw as a mindless rush to spend. It says, one unidentified contractor told government interviewers he was expected to dole out $3 million daily for projects in a single Afghan district roughly the size of a U.S. county. He once asked a visiting congressman whether the lawmaker could responsibly spend that kind of money back home. He said, "Hell no." "Well, sir, that's what you just obligated us to spend, and I'm doing it for communities that live in mud huts with no windows." So you can't just plop out a bunch of money and just expect that to fix things. You can't be doling out $3 million a day on a tiny ass little area, with mud huts and stuff and where they live. It's not going to work. And then this is going to lead into other problems, but it's just going to result in an extreme rise in essentially gang crimes and stuff like that. Which we will, go ahead and get into later. But it also here talks about what happened with it becoming a kleptocracy and incredible corruption. This is Christopher Kolenda, an army colonel who deployed to Afghanistan several times and advised 3 U.S. generals in charge of the war, said that the Afghan government led by President Hamid Karzai had, quote, self-organized into a kleptocracy by 2006. And the U.S. officials failed to recognize the lethal threat it posed to their strategy. Quote, "I like to use a cancer analogy," Kolenda told government interviewers. "Petty corruption is like skin cancer. There are ways to deal with it, and you'll probably be just fine. Corruption within the ministries, higher levels, like colon cancer, it's worse, but if you catch it in time, you're probably okay. Kleptocracy, however, is like brain cancer. It's fatal." So, brain cancer is fatal if it's a, glioblastoma. That shit will probably kill you. But skin cancer is not necessarily, a low tier thing, like especially if it's melanoma. That shit could definitely kill you pretty easy, especially if you don't spot it fast enough. But anyways, you get the point. It says, by allowing corruption to fester, U.S. officials told interviewers they helped destroy the popular legitimacy of the wobbly Afghan government they were fighting to prop up. With judges and police chiefs and bureaucrats extorting bribes, many Afghans soured on democracy and turned to the Taliban to enforce order. Our biggest single project, sadly and inadvertently, of course, may have been the development of mass corruption. Once it gets to the level I saw when I was out there, it's somewhere between unbelievably hard and outright impossible to fix it. So when you dole out a shit ton of money like that, it's going to lead to corruption as well. And the trend that seems to be going on in this document dump is that they kept doing things that would end up turning people towards the Taliban. So this is one example of that. So, to give you what they said in public, this September 4, 2013, says, quote, "This army and this police force have been very, very effective in combat against the insurgents every single day. And I think that's an important story to be told across the board." That's then Army Lieutenant General Mark A. Milley, praising the Afghan security forces during a press briefing from Kabul. Says, year after year, U.S. generals have said in public they're making steady progress on the central plank of their strategy to train a robust Afghan army and national police force that can defend the country without foreign help. So this is basically, this is sort of the crux of what's supposed to be the goal, right? Train up and develop a army that can sort of defend Afghanistan and basically have like a stable, steady government there, right? But obviously, this is not really what's going on. It says, none expressed confidence that the Afghan army and police could ever fend off, much less defeat the Taliban on their own. More than 60,000 members of Afghan security forces have been killed, a casualty rate the U.S. commanders have called unsustainable, which it is. 60,000 is a lot. That's a lot. And when you look at the U.S. Soldier deaths, it's at like I believe like 2.5K, and then there's like 20K plus wounded, and who knows how many Afghan security forces were wounded. But 60,000, yeah, that is definitely an unsustainable number from when the war started. And so they're telling us in public, yeah, this is going great. It's all perfect. The army is being built to defend Afghanistan. And then when you really look at the numbers, it's like, wait a second. This is not stable. This is not literally not working. This is just not, it's not functional. This is one identified U.S. soldier said special forces teams hated the Afghan police, whom they trained and worked with, calling them awful, the bottom of the barrel in the country that is already at the bottom of the barrel. A U.S. military officer estimated that 1/3 of police recruits were drug addicts or Taliban. Yet another called them stealing fools who looted so much fuel from U.S. bases that they perpetually smelled of gasoline. Thinking we could build the military that fast and that well was insane, an unnamed senior you said official told government interviewers. So again, that's another portion of corruption that's going on, right? The cops, the Afghan cops, were very corrupt, which makes sense. You're doling out a shit ton of money, and it's not really a stable situation. That's what's going to happen. And so that's another thing that's going to turn people towards the Taliban, unfortunately. Then what it goes on to say, and this is a big portion, okay, is the opium production in Afghanistan. This is probably the most interesting little tidbit that I saw. It says, meanwhile, as U.S. hopes for the Afghan security forces failed to materialize, Afghanistan became the world's leading source of a growing scourge, opium. The United States has spent about $9 billion to fight the problem over the past 18 years. But Afghan farmers are cultivating more opium poppies than ever. Last year, Afghanistan was responsible for 82% of global opium production, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. In the lessons learned interviews, former officials said almost everything they did to constrain opium farming backfired. We stated that our goal is to establish a flourishing market economy. I thought we should have specified a flourishing drug trade. That this is the only part of the market that's working. And it talks about how they never really figured out how to implement a war on drugs. It says by 2006, U.S. officials feared that narco traffickers had become stronger than the Afghan government, and that money from the drug trade was powering the insurgency. So again, man, this is a super clusterfuck. We already know what happens with the, cartels and shit like that in Mexico and just things like that. It's really dangerous, right? And so it's all backfiring, and it's just such a clusterfuck, okay? And meanwhile, they're lying to everybody about the real status of the war to the public. It says it was a dog's breakfast with no chance of working, an unnamed former senior British official told government interviewers. So this is where it gets really interesting. It says at first, Afghan poppy farmers were paid by the British to destroy their crops, which only encouraged them to grow more the next season. Later, the U.S. government eradicated poppy fields without compensation, which only infuriated farmers and encouraged them to side with the Taliban. It was sad to see so many people behave so stupidly, one U.S. official told government interviewers. Now, another thing that I would imagine that's going on here is probably similar to how, even smaller, really low-key cartels in Mexico are now going up to farmers and saying, give me your fucking avocados, which is actually happening, by the way. It's not a meme, serious story. I'm assuming that was going on here, too. I'm pretty sure, these gangs, basically these narco traffickers and these gangs probably came together and went to those farmers and were like, hey, motherfucker, you better cultivate these goddamn opium crops, you hear me? So I'm guessing that's probably going down as well, but it's just such a fuck up, man. Oh, my goodness. I mean, you pay them to destroy their crops, and then they make more the next season, and then you have, okay, fuck it, we're just gonna completely demolish your fields, and then that turns them to the Taliban. It's just a complete clusterfuck, man. September 8, 2008. Are we losing this war? Absolutely no way. Can the enemy win it? Absolutely no way. Army Major General Jeffrey Schlosser. Schlosser? I don't know. Weird name. So basically, this just talks about whether or not it'd be a Vietnam quagmire. Of course, that's not it. In October 2006, Rumsfeld's speechwriters delivered a paper titled Afghanistan 5 Years Later, brimming with optimism, and highlighted more than 50 promising facts and figures, from the number of Afghan women trained in improved poultry management, more than 19,000, to the average speed on most roads, up 300%. 5 years on, there's a multitude of good news. While it has become fashionable in some circles to call Afghanistan a forgotten war, or to say the United States has lost its focus, the facts belie the myths. And so this is more, lies and propaganda pushed by the Bush administration during his admin. And this really went through for quite a while. Obviously, now it's gone through 3 presidents, right? 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, and now we're almost 4 years through of, Donald Trump. But if we look at these tolls in terms of the war, an estimated 157,000 people have been killed in the war in Afghanistan. So Afghan security forces, 64,000, dude. Again, dude, that is not sustainable. Then you have Afghan civilians, 43,000. That's horrifying. Horrible. Taliban fighters, 42,000. And then you have the U.S. military personnel and the contractors coming in at about like 6.2K. So, the real people who are losing here are the Afghan people because they're the ones dying left and right. You know what I'm saying? People, especially people, joining up in arms in Afghanistan. 64,000 of them dying. That's an extreme amount. This is not working. It's not working. And so none of this shit is working. And so when I read this actually reminded me of what Kyle Kalinske would say about insurgency in Iraq, where, basically if it's low, if the insurgent attacks are low, well, we're on our way to winning, basically. And then once the insurgent attacks get up, it's like, oh, they're getting desperate, and it's coming to an end soon. That's basically what they explain here. It says it was their explanations. The senior National Security Council official said, for example, attacks are getting worse. That's because there are more targets for them to fire at. So more attacks are a false indicator of instability. Then 3 months later, attacks are still getting worse. It's because the Taliban are getting desperate. So it's actually an indicator that we're winning. And so it just keeps going like this. They have some comments here, even from Michael Flynn, saying from the ambassadors down to the low level, they all say we are doing a great job. Really? So if we're doing such a great job, why does it feel like we're losing? This is the Michael Flynn who was, I believe he was getting paid by Turkey as a lobbyist, basically, which is a pretty heavy crime, if you ask me. So, you know what I'm saying? So it's just pretty crazy. He's talking about this as well. But it's just a clusterfuck going on there, man. This is really horrible. Talks about how bad news was stifled, like, oh, you're going to talk about, like, all the deaths and the instability and the Taliban taking over more territory. Shut the fuck up. Don't tell us that, man. Don't demolish our hopes. Don't lower our hopes. And it's just, dude, the American people have been lied to for so long. This is a very fascinating, just a breakdown, basically. Very, very fascinating. But the point here being, man, there's been no success because there was no real set goal. Because there's so many different people. It's OBL, right? Let's get Osama, obviously, get Al-Qaeda. Okay, well, they're gone. Now you're talking about now you're switching over to the Taliban, and then now you've got like ICE. There's some ISIS in Afghanistan as well, and it's horrible. It's very horrible over there, as you guys know. It's like, it's almost like every week, there's an attack in like Kabul. It's like a fucking car bombing or whatever that kills a bunch of people. I think I had seen like a wedding or a funeral that got bombed. It's just horrifying, man, absolutely horrifying. And what the media does now to try to like make you forget about the war even going on, is that they just don't cover it. Nobody talks about the Afghan war anymore. You forget that we're even at war with Afghanistan since 2001, meaning that we're 18 years in. You forget because no one talks about it. And so if you don't talk about it, you usually forget, and it just gets in the back of your mind. And so essentially, if no one is to tell you about what's going on, the people dying over there and how it's not working, and you basically just dumped a shit fuck of money into something that's not actually working. And I'm someone who's for humanitarian aid because I'm a humanitarian, right? But they're clearly not doing it in the right way. They're failing exceptionally, and they're really going nowhere, and there is no real shot of success, especially because my understanding is that Pakistan is, supporting and funding the Taliban, which is something that I'm curious as to why the U.S. is not even addressed or thought about. It seems like I certainly haven't heard anything about that. But the Taliban are just going to keep expanding. They're certainly not going to just die out randomly. And so I don't really see any sort of finish line for the U.S., and that's why I'm really confused just as to what's going on. To be quite frank with you, I just don't really know what's going on. But a fascinating bombshell report, a lot of important information.